So I wanted to start this devotional today by reading a passage of scripture that comes right from the very beginning of Mark's gospel. It's right at the beginning of when Jesus is first inviting individuals to come and be his disciples. So Mark 1, beginning at verse 16, says this: As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As they went a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boats, mending the nets. Immediately Jesus called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with their hired men and followed him. So this got me to thinking as I was reading that about this idea of trying to follow Jesus. Have you ever thought of this? How do we really follow Jesus? And I know that oftentimes for me, trying to follow Jesus meant that I'm going to try to live up to following his words. And so I would listen to his words, I would read scripture, and I would do my best to try to follow his words, because that's what it meant to me to follow Jesus. But then I recognized, boy, just reading the very first real sermon that Jesus preached, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel, wow, there are some challenging things right off the bat for me to try to follow Jesus. And then we hear him talking about taking up his cross, being willing to face suffering, being willing to go through trials, all of that in order to follow Jesus. And I realize that sometimes, try as I might to follow all of those things that Jesus has taught us to do as his disciples, it's not always easy. And as I was thinking about that, I remembered this time when we had the special speaker coming to a church that I was working in. And he was going to be doing a workshop on 2 different days. And I was at the first workshop, and he was doing this great job. And then he said to me afterwards, I was talking with him, he says, "Now, are you going to come tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to try to come." And he looked at me and he says, "You're going to try?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to try to come." You see, I had a lot of other things going on. This was when I was an associate, had a lot of other things going on. And so I was going to try to be there. So then he does this. He takes his hand, he sticks it out like this, and he puts a pen in his hand. He goes, "Okay, I want you to do something. I want you to try to pick up that pen." And I didn't know what to do. You know, I kind of reached down and I realized that there was nothing stopping me from picking up the pen other than the very act of picking up the pen. His point to me, albeit kind of nudie, his point to me was, you don't ever try to do something, you just do it. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. So his thinking was, this whole idea of trying was really a human creation. And trying is really not what we need to do. We just need to do. All right, so that puts me back to trying to live as Jesus taught me to live. And I'm not always sure how to do that. How do I put into practice those words that Jesus taught? Well, then something occurred to me. Wait a minute. What if, rather than trying first to do the words that Jesus did, what if I simply try to live as Jesus did? And you see, that kind of opened up some new ideas for me, because I thought about, how did Jesus live? And I wrote some of these things down because these, to me, were things that I could probably do first before I got into the whole thing of trying to live by his words. What did Jesus do? Well, for one thing, he found time to be off by himself and pray, and to think about where God was in presence in his life. He found time to hang out with his friends and talk about the really important things in his life. He took walks in the communities that he was in and just, I think, observed what was going on in people's lives. He allowed himself to be interrupted even when he was in the middle of doing something else that he felt called to do. He listened to people. He observed people's needs and then he acted on them. He went to synagogue. We're told that he is often in a synagogue teaching or simply being in worship. He seems to have taken time to memorize Scripture because later on throughout his life he uses that Scripture to empower himself when he's being tempted, like in the wilderness, or when he's struggling with other things that are happening. He also wasn't afraid to challenge those that he felt were seeing and understanding things differently. Suddenly as I thought about that, I thought, perhaps before I can ever get to the place where I'm going to be able to live by Jesus' words, maybe I start with doing some of those other things that Jesus did, like finding time to be on my own to pray, like wandering around my community and seeing what is out there. What about listening to people? What about all of those things that he put into his life that seem to make him able to do so many other amazing things? You see, following Jesus could mean following his words, and probably does, but maybe first and foremost it means doing some of those things that Jesus did in his own life. You see, the bottom line, it's not about trying, it's about doing. And if I try to do those things that Jesus did, simple things he surrounded himself with every day, perhaps I'll be able to be a more successful disciple than I am right now.